Friday the 21st of May 2021, Ireland. A group of HSE executives are crammed in a doctor's office. They surround a computer screen in disbelief. They look away and stare right back. This is no hallucination. They have received the key that will put an end to 7 days of absolute hell. The HSE had been the victim of a cyber attack, discovering that all their data had been encrypted. As a result, national and local networks were shut down. This meant appointments were canceled, surgeries rescheduled, and even payrolls put on hold. It seemed like the only solution was to pay for a decryption key, the one that they were staring at right now. Naturally, executives were in disbelief. The very people who had held HSE's data hostage were now providing the key for free. The burning question was, did the hackers have a sudden change of heart about the millions of patients they'd left stranded? The HSE decided not to read too much into it. However, the incident deeply intrigued cyber investigators, who flocked en masse to open the cadaver while it was still warm. What they found suggested this was not an attack to destroy. It was precise, specifically engineered to harm the HSE just enough to pay. This pattern felt oddly familiar. It was Conti, a stealthy ransomware belonging to one of the most sophisticated and elusive groups in the cybercriminal ecosystem, an organization that had taken its name from its most successful creations. The case eventually closed, but the mystery of the key lingered. And in time, it would become the catalyst for Conti's downfall. Every thread of their tragedy can be traced back to this moment, the arrival of the key. Ransomware consists of holding important files and critical data hostage in exchange for a ransom. In a traditional criminal scenario, it would be the equivalent of kidnapping a notorious person in exchange for a large sum of money. However, the ransomware world is not as simple as a kidnapping case. It's an ecosystem in its own right. In this landscape, things are often unclear and rarely absolute. At the end of the day, ecosystems are breathing spaces, and it's very hard to keep track of everything that happens within them. In simple terms, this story is based on a wide range of research that can sometimes be contradictory or even ambiguous. The landscape is so complex and confusing that even ransomware researchers often disagree on groups, methods, and even definitions. So take everything you're about to hear with a pinch of salt. Think of it like a jungle. Dense, layered, and crowded with hundreds of species lurking in the foliage. Those species are ransomware groups. They compete for prey. They steal one another's territory. They reproduce. And in pursuit of conquest, they often merge with other species, adopting their methods, the way they poison their victims. These methods are the ransomware strains, a type of malicious program designed to encrypt data and make it inaccessible for the victim. The goal? To make them desperate enough to pay. Imagine this. You run a business. Everything is going fine. And suddenly, a malware locks all your files, your documents, client files, invoices, everything gone. Then a message appears demanding a payment that you definitely cannot afford. However, you need to make a tough call. These files are literally your life. You make the tough call and pay, only to discover the attackers have no intention of helping you restore anything. Congratulations, you are jobless and broke. So if you don't want to eat canned beans and live under a bridge forever, perhaps Nordstellar could help you out. Built by the team behind NordVPN, Nordstellar is a threat exposure management platform for businesses that helps you detect threats early and stay ahead of attackers. Let's be honest, no tool can completely eliminate online threats. But Nordstellar adds an important extra layer of protection. Many ransomware attacks start with leaked user credentials, and Nordstellar features a data breach monitoring solution that alerts you if your credentials, session cookies, or other sensitive data are leaked, helping to prevent account takeovers. Also, by tracking keywords across the dark web and ransomware blogs where attackers discuss potential targets, it finds mentions of your name, brand, or partners you work with to uncover risks ahead of time. And that's only the tip of the iceberg, since Nordstellar has a wide range of other features, such as attack surface management and brand protection, identifying impersonations of your brand across web, social media, and other sources. Nordstellar has access to one of the largest dark and deep web data pools in the industry, with over 40,000 sources, which help identify leaked data and other vulnerabilities before they can be used for malicious purposes. So if you don't want to end up with all your files on the dark web and nothing but anxiety and the urge to set your room on fire, check the link in the description and use the code CyberNews10 for a 10% discount on Nordstellar. Thanks again to Nordstellar for sponsoring today's video. Now, back to Conti. Ransomware is more than just malware that locks your data and demands payment. It's a living ecosystem, just like a jungle, where strains and the groups behind them constantly evolve, reproduce, and spread. And it was precisely within this breathing ecosystem that the Conti ransomware strain was brought to life. Conti's origins are fuzzy, but researchers estimate it began circulating in 2019, just around the time another powerful ransomware strain, Ryuk, began slowing down its operations. That was strange. Ryuk was already one of the most prolific strains in the world. Researchers had tracked it since 2018, watching it grow more efficient and aggressive. There was no apparent reason for it to fade, unless something was replacing it. At first glance, Conti looked like a copycat of Ryuk. The encryption, the malware toolbox, and even copy-pasted portions of their source code. However, the scary part of these similarities was that this new strain was not only uncannily similar, but specifically crafted to do what Ryuk was doing 10 times better. If Ryuk was good at defeating defenses, the new strain was almost undetectable. If Ryuk was good at encrypting data, the new strain was faster than any other variant to date. And if Ryuk was precise, the new strain had capabilities that made it surgically and meticulously precise. For instance, it was able to distinguish between data stored locally and data shared over a network, encrypting only the most valuable information. However, this could still be just a coincidence. At the end of the day, the ransomware ecosystem is complicated and strains are copied all the time. But when researchers dissected these two strains, they realized something. Ryuk and Conti did not share encryption methods, toolboxes, and mechanisms, but they poisoned victims the same way, through TrickBot and Emotet. TrickBot and Emotet were banking trojans, a type of malware frequently used to steal and collect sensitive data. Both of them emerged years prior to Conti's operations. Emotet as early as 2014. TrickBot was used to exfiltrate credit card data. Emotet had the ability to sniff network traffic to intercept credentials sent to banking websites. But Ryuk's operations transformed them. They turned these two ancient and mediocre banking tools into surgical malware. Now they were not only capable of stealing information, but introducing a set of tools to perform ransomware attacks precisely and almost undetectably. Think of it like Matryoshka dolls. From the outside, you see one doll, but if you open it, another one appears inside. The first doll is Emotet. Inside, it has TrickBot, but even more Matryoshka are hidden inside it, a collection of tools to harvest credentials, move undetected through networks, and place backdoors. And at the very center, the smallest and most lethal Matryoshka, the ransomware payload. Without TrickBot and Emotet, it couldn't reach its destination. The chain would break. To understand how this works in practice, let's go back to the 2021 HSE attack. Ransomware attacks usually incorporate 5 phases: initial access, reconnaissance, exfiltration, deployment, and extortion. Initial access is about getting a foothold. Even though it can be done by a variety of techniques, Conti usually took the route of phishing. In the HSE attack, attackers sent a malicious email to an HSE worker in March of 2021 with a Microsoft Excel file. When opened, it deployed Emotet, the first Matryoshka. Once inside, Emotet gathered information about the user and the computer. This is key to uncovering our second Matryoshka, TrickBot, which runs in memory and injects itself into a legitimate process to avoid detection. That's when reconnaissance starts. Here, attackers familiarize themselves with the network to identify and steal data. This phase can take weeks. In the HSE attack, it lasted around 8 weeks. Here, TrickBot uncovered its collection of Matryoshka to help threat actors move laterally, avoid detection, and steal credentials. This phase is the most dangerous one. Security teams can detect unusual behavior. In fact, the HSE detected suspicious activity in early May while threat actors were exploring the network. Unfortunately, the IT staff failed to quarantine computers, and threat actors continued moving freely. Next is exfiltration. Threat actors look for sensitive files that can be used for extortion. In this case, employee and patient information. Once threat actors acquire all the files, they exfiltrate them and send them to their command and control servers. Now it's time for the last matryoshka to be uncovered. The deployment phase begins. Here is where the ransomware executes. The systems are encrypted and the ransom note is delivered. Victims frequently need to upload the ransom note to a recovery service website, which would redirect them to another portal to start negotiations, a process the HSE most likely faced that morning of May when they discovered the attack. That was the Conti model. Conti and Ryuk shared a lot of similarities. Conti was the evolved version of Ryuk, larger variety of tools, faster encryption, and customizable processes. Emotet and TrickBot were common entry points, but in some cases, they were replaced with alternative malware. But the Ryuk-Conti saga does not end here. Researchers traced cryptocurrency transactions and found that wallets associated with Conti had financial links to Ryuk. This means that ransomware payments were being moved between actors tied to both strains. Whether Conti was a rebrand, successor, or internal evolution, it was clear that ransomware strains were sharing members, infrastructure, and resources. This was not a random mutation in the jungle. It was a lineage. Who was behind it all? Conti was not just a ransomware strain. It was much more. It became a multifaceted organization with over 100 members and a sophisticated infrastructure that closely resembled a business. And at the center of it all was him. Stern, Conti's leader. Some say Stern was just one tentacle of a much larger entity, Wizard Spider. If you compare it to anything, it would be a cartel, a brand at the top, with smaller subgroups controlling specific territories or operations. In this scenario, Stern was simply the leader of one of the local gangs. However, some researchers disagree. They argue Stern was not a local leader. He was the leader of the cartel, the one capable of merging two previously competing groups, TrickBot and Conti. In this interpretation, TrickBot wasn't just a malware, and Conti was not just a ransomware strain. They were overlapping gangs, sharing personnel, infrastructure, and revenue. We spoke with Alex Holden, cybersecurity researcher and owner of Hold Security, to understand this categorization problem better.
So there are three groups, Emotet, TrickBot, and Conti. These are the defined groups. Were there others? Yes. Some smaller, some bigger came and went, and they were in orbit of each other, but they never end up working together. Then there are strains of ransomware. Conti had its own. Ryuk was a type of ransomware that came out from TrickBot, and so did Enigma, which was supposed to be a replacement. Different functions. Emotet was mostly around finding victims rather than rolling out ransomware. So the gang itself and the way of encryption, those multiple steps, were handled differently. Emotet always went hand in hand with TrickBot, and a lot of members were jumping between one and the other, and they had mostly codependent relationship. Conti came along later after ransomware projects from TrickBot had failed, and Conti was a gang on its own. They were lending their capabilities to many, but TrickBot and Conti started working together, and eventually this partnership became prevalent.
Whatever the case is, Conti was far from being the subgroup of a shady cartel. It was a corporation. By 2021, Stern's business had reached $180 million in ransom across approximately 700 campaigns. Of that, an estimated $25 million was reinvested in physical office space, hardware, and hiring workers from both illegitimate and legitimate work platforms. At one point, they were even believed to have subscriptions to legitimate security tools. This was Ransomware-as-a-Service on an industrial scale. Ransomware-as-a-Service is a type of ransomware model in which threat actors not only deploy ransomware, but also develop and refine it to rent it to other criminals. These threat actors, known as affiliates, use the ransomware to conduct their own attacks, frequently giving a cut of what they earn to their landlords. Of course, this is all theoretical, and that's part of the problem. We often talk about ransomware in the third person, and it's very difficult to understand Conti and ransomware in general without real insight. That's why we tried to contact a member of Conti. Although we were unable to reach anybody from the group, we did speak with someone involved in the scene. the former leader of a ransomware group that used the strain Ghostlocker, to hear his perspective on this ecosystem.
First started off, we went into ransomware kind of blindly, though we had a very great development team and we did have an understanding of it. We had this whole 5 families thing that I built at the time, which helped us into the landscape of ransomware scene with, experienced people and understanding people, right? So it was, from there, everything was smooth sailing and kind of easy to go through. Contacting the targets that were attacked was, it purely depends on how much pressure is put on them publicly. And even privately, when we reached out to them, we did every means possible to reach out to them and increase the pressure, because to our understanding, it was pressure, honestly, that made them want to pay up, reputational losses, and that would eventually lead to financial losses. Their customers will not trust them. If they're a public company, their stock value can go down. So these things eventually, the increased pressure is what forced them to eventually pay up. When it comes to dealing with affiliates, also that was very, very easy, very straightforward. We had rules in place that was set not to be broken. Affiliates that reached out to us or affiliates that we were interested in, and we went and offered them an opportunity with Ghostlocker at the time. It was very straightforward, very easy, and it was a simple deal, At the end of the day, and I know that's to be true, a lot of ransomware operators, especially the ones that are still around, like Conti, for example, all the major ransomware operators, they all see it purely as a business.
From the inside, business is always complicated. Everything is carefully calculated to make as much profit as possible, which is essentially what made the model take off. The entire process is overseen closely, from malware development to the selection of targets.
We also did target countries that didn't exactly understand what it was, or didn't exactly understand what to do. We targeted companies that we knew would freak out during an incident, right? Companies that had money, but the moment an incident hits, they don't have the right team, they start freaking out, they cause even more mess ups. So to us, what mattered the most is it became a psychological game once the ransomware was deployed. Once we had the data, once we had the malware dropped into their system, it was a psychological game. That's how we got our payments, right?
Lastly, it's very important to cover your tracks. The ransomware ecosystem has survived despite the multiple takedowns and close investigations from researchers. Keeping an eye on law enforcement became a natural part of the job.
It is very possible. There are a lot of undercovers, and it happens more often than you think, right? And I wouldn't say it leads to paranoia. A lot of these times, they don't have the right permission or the right warrants to actually pull anything off. So it's very easy to kind of spot them or notice them. And when it comes to infiltration, you have to be really, I hate to say, you have to be really stupid to kind of fall for it, right? So that's the only way that we can go into that. You have to be, I won't say you have to be paranoid. You have to know that you're monitored 24/7 and how to keep your OPSEC tight as much as possible. You have to have that, not to a schizophrenic level that everything's on isolation and shutdown mode, but you have to have that feeling and the constant realization in your head that if I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing, or I'm going to continue, be it ransomware, hacktivism, cybercrime, or just hacking for the sake of hacking, right, for the sake of curiosity, then you always have to have this thought in the back of your head that I must make sure that my tracks don't get caught up. I have to make sure that I can get away with this. I have to have a getaway plan.
All of what the former leader of Ghostlocker describes began around 2018, but it was not until Conti's generation of ransomware that it truly took off. And out of all the groups, Conti was one of the most successful at implementing it. The group had standardized attacks, in-house infrastructure, hundreds of members, and clear roles and responsibilities. Does that sound familiar? Well, yes, working for Conti was like attending a regular 9 to 5. And just like a regular job, group members had their working hours, days off, performance reviews, referrals, office space, and more. Conti made ransomware as a service a true trade.
It had management system. The management had its own communication channels. They were not only communicating, they were also having kind of board meetings and stuff like that. They were issuing directives. They had HR department, real HR department, where 3 people were employed They were conducting professional-grade interviews. They had physical offices, and they had ways to procure certain components. At some point, the budget for expansions exceeded 200 million rubles for a single year from TrickBot. So they were operating as a real business. They had IT departments that had computerization. Also, one group would be doing only encryption. Another one would be doing host exploration. Some of those are going to be doing lateral movements and taking over Active Directory within the company. So each group would have its own specialty.
Stern brought innovation to an industry that was already booming, and it paid off. However, this could not have been possible without a little help. Remember that we mentioned earlier that these gangs operated like a cartel? In traditional cartels, most gangs tend to have ties with powerful patrons, politicians, local authorities, or even the government. This usually ensures a symbiotic type of protection. Stern was certainly not a drug lord, but he sold himself as one. Because you can't run a multi-million-dollar illegal business while law enforcement worldwide is dismantling your servers and threatening your members with arrest. Stern had a godfather that offered the protection necessary to keep business as usual. Until it didn't. Working for Conti was not just about the money. It was about community. Senior leaders did not shy away from discussing news, personal matters, or even philosophical reflections about life. Some went as far as inviting peers to meet their families. In many ways, the group had a familiar feel. At the end of the day, members were connected by their shared Russian roots. But not all ties were as organic as some tried to make them seem. Some were synthetically created by the Federal Security Service, or FSB, Russia's state security infrastructure. The evidence is multiple, varying from rumors to more solid theories. For example, one of Conti's tools, SIDO, was designed specifically to look for and steal information related to military and geopolitical affairs. A criminal gang would not really have a need for this, unless directed to serve a specific purpose. We talked about this with cybersecurity researcher and writer Allan Liska, who had some theories about it.
It's hard to operate in Russia without the Russian government knowing what you're doing. And so, again, that's speculation that there was a close relationship between Conti and the FSB or the Russian government in general, likely fueled why they want this. So, they give, here, get this for us while you're in the middle of carrying out your operations. That would be lovely. Again, Conti's not going to confide in me exactly what they're doing, but that is where the speculation comes from, and that is probably why those keywords are in there.
But even if we consider the info stealer a coincidence, further evidence comes from communications between Stern and senior members, in which they reference setting up an office for government topics. The intent is unclear, but it suggested some sort of state interest from Russia. Even other criminal groups acknowledged Stern's connections. One developer of the malware Quackbot allegedly said that Stern was part of the FSB. Moreover, there is anecdotal evidence that Conti received some tasking from various unknown Russian intelligence officials. It's rumored that one of the members provided a list for the Russian military intelligence service to review. However, one of the most telling examples involved a mysterious user by the name JohnnyBoy77, who apparently asked Conti to hack a journalist at a Dutch investigative reporting group, Bellingcat, and steal a specific file called Navalny FSB. At the time, Bellingcat was investigating how the Russian government conducts brutal surveillance and persecution of the leader of the Russian opposition. Undoubtedly, the FSB was very interested in knowing what the investigators had uncovered. Months later, the executive director of Bellingcat tweeted that one of their contributors had been compromised by a global cybercrime group acting on FSB orders. Leaked chats revealed that this group was Conti. Some researchers also suggest Conti had some protection from Vladimir Ivanovich Plotnikov, a high-ranking Russian politician. Plotnikov was allegedly flying with members of Conti in their private jet. While most of these claims cannot be verified completely, they definitely add to the extensive relationship between Conti and the FSB. But perhaps the most telling sign of their relationship was Conti's knowledge of internal Russian affairs, like, for example, anticipating court cases.
They never talked about it directly. They always suggested certain things, but they had connections and ability to bypass certain components. Even the rollout of Enigma, which was a new ransomware component for Emotet, and TrickBot rejuvenation after the first fail attempt. They were setting November 15th, I believe 2020 for the rollout. This was a specific date, while the whole gang for months prior to that were priming to case in Moscow's court, where many TrickBot and Emotet members were named as persons of interest or witnesses. So the gang knew about this. They were covering and providing lawyers to its members, and they also were telling people not to worry because this will all go away. So on November 15th, Moscow court dismisses the case. So that was internal knowledge. It was ability to influence Russian justice system.
But this protection is conditional. Godchilds need to earn their protection and remain useful. Take another older ransomware gang as an example, Revil. Once Russia no longer needed them, the group was dismantled and arrested. So beware, ransomware gangs. Godfathers will only sponsor you if you continue selling yourself to them. Conti was almost too big to fail. A complex ransomware chain, hundreds of affiliates, a sophisticated business, and even a godfather protecting the whole enterprise. It even managed to thrive despite the takedowns of TrickBot and Emotet. And yet, it still failed. Some say this failure was triggered by the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine. But that's not true. The cracks started appearing 1 year earlier. Let's go back to the beginning of this video, the 2021 HSE attack. Remember the decryption key? It was given to the HSE for free. The pressure of the initial dump was intense, but all of a sudden it disappeared and the key was simply given. The HSE didn't question it, but the key was crucial. It was the catalyst for a series of mistakes that had been accumulating over time. Turns out the HSE was not what Stern wanted.
The Conti gang, who actually committed this crime, had very specific orders not to attack medical facilities. This was on the Conti side. TrickBot did something different, but with Conti side, they were furious. They found a person who was responsible. There was a memo circulating within the Conti group saying that what had occurred was a fluke, a mistake, and individuals who were responsible for this would be dealt with. The team member who did this lied about the infrastructure. This was a huge issue for Conti because they had different image.
Conti had promised to spare hospitals. Attacking the HSE was bad reputation, the worst offense in a gentleman's affair like ransomware. Stern was distressed, not about the attack itself, but because this uncovered a disturbing reality: cracks in his empire. These cracks were not new, but Ireland had exposed them. So Stern responded the only way he knew, by tightening control. Affiliates and members started paying, literally, for their mistakes. They would have money taken away from their paycheck or suffer humiliation in chats. Workers also started being scolded for not working enough hours or simply not being available during specific times. Even during Christmas, Stern expected them to be online and available. But pushing the machine too hard does not make cracks disappear. It widens them. Stern applied pressure and gave almost nothing in return. You see, Conti had a complicated relationship with affiliates. Instead of running by percentages like other similar ransomware groups like Lockbit or Revil, they paid them at a fixed wage, making them somewhat part of their inner operations. That bond should have created loyalty, but the low wages and the not-so-nice Stern policy created resentment. And in August, one affiliate reached his breaking point. He leaked internal manuals and technical data from Conti. Researchers gained insights into Conti and used the manuals to fortify organizations. At the same time, the US increased pressure on ransomware, forcing Conti to shift attacks outside its most profitable targets. Perhaps a combination of all these factors cornered Conti. All of a sudden, it was harder to succeed in attacks, and the cracks became windows for law enforcement and researchers to peer inside. And then, the war began. Russia announced its full offensive operations against Ukraine in February of 2022. Conti responded with a bold statement offering full support to their country. Whether this was a genuine or strategic move to ensure the group's survival is unclear. Most likely, it was a mix of both. At that point, Conti's infrastructure consisted of a mix of core members, paid affiliates, and a rather big network of insiders who had infiltrated over the years through Conti's cracks. One of these insiders was a Ukrainian researcher who, after seeing Conti's statement, decided enough was enough. They deserved to be humiliated publicly. He published everything. More than 2 years of investigation were poured out to the public. And by everything, we mean everything, from command and control infrastructure to internal conversations between members. The secret recipe for ransomware success was not that secret anymore. Even after the initial dump, additional chats continued to surface. Members were seen responding in real time to the leaks, wiping past activity, removing production management systems, and moving to other communication channels. Stern, however, was nowhere to be found. Since mid-January, he had been silent, perhaps sensing that something was terribly wrong. It's impossible to know whether he had a hunch or whether the incoming war had changed his perspective. But whatever the reason, his absence stirred chaos within the group. Rumors started spreading, and threat actors started feeling unsafe. This did not feel like another takedown. It felt like the end. Just a few days before the leak, senior members ended the speculation with a statement asking the group to take an extended break. The leaks may not have caused the whole infrastructure to collapse, but likely accelerated a process that had already started developing since the beginning of the year. Whatever the case was, the leaks certainly represented a wake-up call. Threat actors realized they were no longer protected. If they didn't evolve, they would not survive. In many ways, the leaks marked the end of an era. Ransomware gangs were no longer a massive, venomous creature, but many smaller, ferocious strains, still capable of biting hard. Conti understood this too. Perhaps it was finally time to say goodbye. On April 17th, the Ministry of Finances of Costa Rica received a ransom note. Conti had exfiltrated and encrypted 1 terabyte of taxpayer files. Initially, the government attempted to keep the incident under wraps, but after refusing to pay, Conti posted the data online, forcing them to acknowledge the problem. The consequences were immediate, with estimated losses ranging from $38 million to as much as $125 million. Costa Rica refused to pay, and Conti responded with a broader campaign of attacks, targeting local authorities and ministries. Daily disruptions continued for weeks. Finally, Costa Rica asked for the support of the international community. The USA, Spain, and several private companies intervened, helping to block further attacks and stabilizing critical systems. The truth is, Costa Rica was not prepared for such an attack. We're talking about a country that didn't even have dedicated IT departments to some of its critical institutions. But the crisis was far from over. On May 31st, the Hive ransomware, another ransomware strain associated with Conti, crippled the systems of the Social Security Fund, the institution responsible for healthcare. The consequences were devastating. Small medical facilities closed, pharmacies reverted to manual prescriptions, appointments were canceled, and even doctors struggled to access patient records, even for scheduled surgeries. By June 3rd, Costa Rica declared an institutional emergency, reporting that 759 of its 1,500 servers and more than 10,000 computers had been affected, crippling a huge part of the medical infrastructure. Approximately 3,000 appointments had to be rescheduled, and full recovery took weeks. Strategically, Costa Rica was an attractive target, a close ally to the United States, and a relatively good economy. However, some researchers noticed something strange happening behind the scenes, something that hinted that the Costa Rica incident was more than a ransomware attack. Conti's infrastructure suddenly started vanishing. First, the news panel went offline. Then the rest of the infrastructure started disappearing. Chat rooms, messaging platforms, servers, proxy hosts, all gone. Was Conti going under a massive reset? Was this a rebrand? Several weeks passed by, and infrastructure never came back. No communication, no public statement. Conti was abruptly gone. It had used the Costa Rica attack as a spotlight, a final cover to dismantle and move on. Just as it had quietly appeared in 2019, 3 years later, it disappeared, leaving a hole in the ecosystem that no other gang could ever fill. But is this really what happened after all? Did Conti actually leave a void in the space, or perhaps we're reading Conti's legacy the wrong way? The thing is, Conti changed the ransomware ecosystem for good, but not in the way you think. Their disappearance did not leave a void to mourn. In reality, their disappearance represented absolutely nothing for threat actors. Affiliates and ransomware operators are not masterminds or evil geniuses, as most researchers and law enforcement try to paint them. They are nuanced individuals, each with their own particular reasons to enter the scene. Some to feed their families, some for thrills, some for luxury.
So every person had their own unique thing that would tie to it. Now those that are extremely loyal to the group that's behind them, maybe it could be a reason that, okay, they're doing really well and getting paid really highly, that they're like, okay, I cannot leave these guys behind, they looked out for me when I was starting out. Or someone who's really desperate and just needs cash left and right, be it for survival purposes or be it that he wants a luxurious lifestyle, wants a car.
They couldn't be less interested in symbols or legacy. They only really share one thing in common: make money.
When it comes to ransomware, researchers like to see them as direct threats. You need to think like an attacker when you want to catch them. However, if I'm going to talk from a researcher's perspective, they have to think like an attacker. They have to see why the business succeeds and how to actually make the business defunct. Ransomware wouldn't exist if it didn't turn into a business. The reason it exists nowadays and the reason it's as popular as it is purely because it's able to run as a business.
And pretty much the only thing to do to stop the business is to arrest them. And this is something pretty complicated given the Godfather figure watching over them. At the end of the day, if you can't arrest them, they will probably evolve and find new ways to keep business as usual.
I mean, even if they regulate cryptocurrencies, they'll eventually find a way to cash out in some different ways, you know? Like, at the moment, Monero is huge. I don't see a way that they're going to apply regulations or KYC to Monero. Sure, some exchanges can be applied to, but there will always be a way to move cryptocurrency around. The entire concept of cryptocurrency is that it's decentralized, right?
While some Conti associates have been arrested over the years, most of them are free. Only a small fraction of the Ryuk, TrickBot, Emotet ecosystem faced meaningful consequences. Most are still active, likely in smaller groups, like Hello Kitty, Black Suit, or Black Basta. Conti's legacy may not have mattered much for their own members, but it was important for the broader ransomware community. The leaked Conti source code inspired a new generation of ransomware strains, including Scarecrow, Mimic, Putin Team, Gazprom, and Monty, among others. Several of these variants were deployed during the Ukraine conflict and continue to be active today. Speaking of the Ukraine-Russian conflict, some rumors believe Stern ended up caught up in the war. While it's unclear what he's doing here, he's probably acting like a good godchild. And in a way, this is all he knows what to do: be a good godchild to his powerful and resentful godfather.
So last I heard, the head of Conti himself is doing military service properly in Russia right now, and in exchange they turn a blind eye to everything that he does. You know, and the head of Conti is he's specialized when it comes to online security or hacking as a whole, right? What they have him doing, I don't have any more details than that. Could be cyber warfare, could be that they have him physically on the ground. It doesn't matter. The point is these people are well connected, especially the really, really high players. Yes, they do have connections, and that's why a lot of them can have a big bounty and stay out of jail walking freely.
This is the story of Conti, but there are many more intriguing ransomware tales we could cover. Perhaps we could even find a way to release the hour-and-a-half of content that did not make the cut. Let us know if that's something you'd be interested in watching. Subscribe to support our project, and see you next time.